Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our wonderful panel this afternoon, Fostering the Industry in the Service of Employees. Conscious that we're a little pressed for time, so we'll dive straight in. Shobit, much as all of us, I think, hope that COVID's in the rearview mirror now. Can you help give us an understanding of how your office-based teams, the culture, the shift away perhaps from being location-based, etc. Obviously, it's quite difficult for hospitality-based staff not to be tied to their units in many ways. But can you give us an understanding of what you've seen in the industry or how potentially some of your businesses have responded to that?
I think that COVID taught us a lot in terms of how the whole, without traveling, we thought that this is something which is never going to work in a hospitality industry. But COVID taught us that so much of work can be managed, remotely. And if you club it with, many other factors which are which you experience while doing a business in UAE, especially now that the weekdays have changed in UAE from Monday to Friday, while the rest of the GCC still remains, the Sunday to Thursday. So that adds up more pressure. On top of it, if you add more elements like if you're here and you're dealing with vendors and partners in Europe and US, again the time zone is an issue. And then there is traveling time. So if you club all of these things, I think that there are steps that we should have taken long ago, but it kind of COVID accelerated all of that. So on our side, what we have done is that we have really made a lot of progress into flexible working hours. So the office doesn't start at 8, it doesn't start at 9, it doesn't start at 10. It starts at about the time that you enter and you can go on. So that is one thing. We have also allowed a lot of working from home options. And actually in several cases, we have actually also allowed working from offshore. So if somebody is based out of Italy or somebody is based out of India, we have actually even allowed that. So, so in terms of what it has done to our business, I think that it has massively helped in terms of traveling cost. Which is a direct impact on your P&L. But on top of it, I think that it has also impacted a lot in terms of people's motivation and their overall working hours. So to us, it has taught us good lessons and in a good way.
Great, thank you very much. Steve, next one's for you, if you don't mind. It's a bit of a philosophical question, but there's been a lot of conversation around we're calling the Great Resignation. So the largest walkout post-COVID has been in hospitality and F&B. The philosophical debate is whether or not it was going to happen anyway, whether COVID catalyzed it or perpetuated or whatever it is. But can you help us understand how the industry has been reacting to that and what the approach could be, should be, in order to attract and retain this next generation of hospitality employees in response to that?
Thank you. I think a lot of it has to go back to how we treat people. Someone said earlier on one of the other panels about treating your people better than your customers, and that's exactly it, though. For many years in the F&B industry, people weren't taken care of. They were a dime a dozen to a lot of people, to a lot of owners and big companies. Everyone was just a dime a dozen. After COVID, now people are realizing that that's not the case anymore.
Sure.
A lot of people have moved on. I have a lot of friends that left the industry and went on to other careers. When we look at how we can retain people, I think you've seen a rise of the chief people officer in the last couple of years, where we're really working on culture and supporting our teams individually as well as a whole. The way that we approach it from Crush Brands is we're more holistic in the sense that we want. We foster from within. We bring people on board. We bring them in at a lower position, and we train them. We build them up. We create training programs for everybody, so we can help grow them to higher positions and higher pay and better lives, and give them a real opportunity.
Right.
A lot of people before COVID, they didn't. If you were a cook, you were a cook. You were a dishwasher, you're a dishwasher. You never really had a career plan of how you're going to go from one position to the next. So I think a lot of employers nowadays are starting to focus more on those career plans. So the amount of money that we invest in training somebody, in acquiring them and training them, that we see that person grow within our company.
Sure.
Versus, going from one to the next to the next. I don't see a lot of people moving around very often.
Great.
A lot more people are staying right where they are if they're treated well.
Great. Elias, the next one is for you, if we may. Big discussion, it talks about the whole time, this whole work-life balance idea, and it seems to get bandied around a lot as something a bit airy-fairy, but it seems quite difficult for a lot of organizations to actually execute it in practice. And if I can get a little more specific about remuneration within that. So let's be honest, a lot of staff, everybody needs to get paid, so let's not dwell too much on the importance of salaries, but how can you kind of counterbalance that if you're unable to increase the salary potentially to where you want it to? What are the ideas around culture, empowerment, succession planning, training, all of those other things that also empower and motivate the staff as well? What are the examples you've seen of that? Is there anything you can tell us about that you've been able to execute in response to that?
Thank you. The conversation about work-life balance has been on the spotlight lately. I'm not a particular fan of the term work-life balance. I think it's more of a work-life integration.
Yeah.
And we're all seeking that harmony within the integration because, your work and your life aren't separate,
Sure.
no matter as much as we want them to be, but they're not. So it's more of a creating that harmony between your work and your life balance. And it's our job as leaders to find strategies to give that to our frontliners. As mentioned earlier, they're not going to have nights off. They're not going to have weekends off. It's just not the business we're in. So it's up to us to come up with strategies to give them that harmony they seek. Some practice that we've implemented is giving everyone an advanced monthly rota. So they know in advance for an entire month what shifts they're going to be working, what days off they have, and they can kind of plan their lives around that. We also give them a mechanism to be able to swap shifts seamlessly. So if something comes up, they have to pick up a kid from school or something, they can swap a shift with a colleague without having to jump through so many holes. It's a seamless process that gives them more of a harmonious, balance between what they have to do outside of work. Speaking of compensation, so, it's the topic of compensation versus culture is a never-ending debate. I think, at the lower level income, compensation is always going to come first. Regardless of how great your culture is,
Yeah.
At that level, a 10% or 15% increment can be life-changing for some families. So we've got to provide them with adequate compensation.
Sure, great, thanks. Shobit, the next one's for you, actually. I want to touch on training. I mean, Elias mentioned it there, and we talked about it a little bit as one of those components that helps to motivate staff in addition to culture and remuneration and all those things. But in a market that is as transient as the UAE, you often see a lot of operators that are a bit reluctant to invest in training by virtue of the fact that you have well-trained staff for an extra 5, 10, 15, 20%. Someone's going to come along and they're going to harvest them for their own operation. And that, I've been here since forever and I've seen it happen so many times. What are you able to do in order to respond to that? Because staff training and that whole empowerment idea is extremely important. But the risk is the next guy comes along and you're back at square zero, essentially. So what are some of the steps that the industry can take in response to that, especially in regard to a market as transient as the GCC overall?
It's a very genuine problem, especially in this market where there is a lot of transit population. That is one. And the other is that, and I really appreciate this part, that in case of UAE especially, people can change job as though that they were in their own country. So it is not so much restrictive like in some other GCC countries where there is a contract of at least a year or 2 years. So therefore, training comes really handy, and this is something that we invest very heavily on. A few examples that I can quote. One is what we run is called as a passport program, because the most important part of training, in my opinion, is the transparency. You must know what are you getting trained for and why. Why are you getting trained for it? I mean, is it just because somebody wants to take mark, or is it something which is going to help you to grow in your career? So what Passport program does is that when anybody joins us, the first thing that he gets is the passport, and and the passport clearly tells you your complete journey, that you are starting as a driver or as an insider, whatever, and what steps that you need to take and what trainings that you need to complete for you to become a store manager. and which is a huge thing. So from day one, you are aware that what are you getting trained for and why, and what are the steps for you to become, and when will you become that. So that is one part. The other is we strongly believe that nobody should get to their work immediately after joining. They need to know their rights. They need to know what are my duties, which everybody tells, but what are my rights that nobody tells. So this is important. So we make sure that everybody passes through a very strong new team member orientation session, which is not only for team members, but even for the managers. And the third very important part that I would also make mention is, if you look at our workforce, almost half of them are drivers. So therefore, there is a lot that needs to be done. I heard, in the previous panel, how difficult the delivery is, and how delivery service timing is so important for the customers. For us, we deliver in the whole of UAE on an average of 22.5 minutes. That's the average across UAE, which means that more than 80% of our orders are actually delivered within 19 minutes. So that requires a lot of training, and it is not just on-ground training. There is a lot of technical training that needs to be given to the drivers. And therefore, we invest a lot in technology. We invest a lot in training our drivers on technology. So, in summary, I would say training is difficult and it is expensive, but it pays for it. Because more trained people stays longer, they are more loyal, and they obviously add much more value to the business.
Great, thank you very much. Stephen, another one for you. Stasha, Hesham, sorry, we're going to get to you guys in a second. But no, I know, very patient, thank you. Stephen, as a sort of resident tech guy on the panel today, I'd like to have a kind of brief conversation around the useful application of technology. But I'd like to kind of caveat that with something we had a bit of back and forth about the other day about the prevalence of driverless trucks, particularly in the US. There's 3.5 million truck drivers in the US, and the risk is that half of them get automated out of their jobs in the next 10 years, which is, going to be extremely troubling to manage. With regard to food tech specifically, the useful applications of technology that you've seen, that you execute yourself, that actually empower the teams and do not ultimately automate them out of your businesses.
Yeah, tech is really coming along, especially in the food and beverage industry. 10 years ago, tech wasn't even something you talked about in restaurants. It just wasn't there. Panel earlier, Foodix, Deliverac, they're all coming together. They're building these amazing systems that help us out. But when you look at the robotics and the automation of systems, for me, as a chef at heart, I don't like to see that. I understand from a business side that if you can reduce your labor costs and whatnot, it helps you. But I think people still want that interaction. I don't think you can actually eliminate people in a restaurant, because you need that. A machine doesn't understand what the flavor is. It doesn't understand it just follows the pre-programmed instructions. I've seen it in some cloud kitchens. They have these salad making machines that can do 300 salads in an hour. And yeah, that's great, but it takes up all this space, and ultimately people still have to prep the food that goes into those machines. So, you really don't save anything by having these giant robotic machines in your kitchens. Because people still have to clean them, they have to maintain them, they have to fill them with product. So, I don't see that as just my personal opinion. I don't see that as being a big thing. But the automation of other things I've seen in KSA, I was in a kitchen, and they had robots going through the kitchen, taking up orders, and it's cool. It's kind of gimmicky, I think, because ultimately they don't move fast enough. They get stuck. You have to charge them. You don't charge them, they don't work. I prefer the physical touch.
Right, okay. Well, we're going to come back to tech if we've got time a little bit for the rest of the group. Hesham, we'll come to you next if we may. As the CEO of a large multinational brand owner with operations all across the region, what are some of the benefits and drawbacks that you've seen, particularly in response to the last couple of years where everyone's had to make decisions very, very quickly? You're obviously in charge of quite a large organization with significant back office and support staff. is that back office resource and that support staff resource a help or a hindrance in terms of the speed of decision making that you have had to execute in the last 24 or so months as a result of everything that's gone on, all the disruption?
Thank you very much. I think, running a multi-country operations, it's very difficult for many reasons, and one of them is the culture that you deal with in different countries, different regulations, different labor laws. So it's really how you find the harmony to get everybody on the same energy and synergy level. So COVID, really what COVID did for us is he made us forget everything we learned in the last 30 years about this business. Today, we're finding new rules, we're finding things that we never thought it will be. As Elias said, we are in a business that we work weekends, work nights, work mornings, while other people, what COVID gave them, it's the comfort zone. Today in the US, for example, I don't know where people went, but every single restaurant you go to is asking for people to work. So obviously, and unemployment is down. So what I'm saying is, it's really tough today to motivate people to stay for many reasons. Now, what makes it even tougher is you operate in different countries. So today, I think we are in a nickel and dime business. We don't have, I wish we have 30% margins, 40% margins. We don't have. So cost leadership is still the same, but we have to do the minimum on pay scale. In a way, we cannot no longer pay below the market average. You really have to rise to that, and that will increase your cost. But today, the motivation to keep a back office employee or a frontliner is beyond just money. It really is. One thing I learned when I joined Yum about 27 years ago, and they told us is number one reason people leave organizations because they are not being appreciated. That never changed. And the number two reason was a company does not care about my personal problems. That was number one and two. Pay at that time was number 5. I'm talking about 27 years ago. What I haven't seen change is number 1 and 2. Today, as organizations, no matter what country are we operating in, we as top management, we need to really care about our people. I only see this the only retention method that we can keep our people, care about your people, and appreciate them. Everything else will come after that. And this is, how we can try to motivate people in the back office. After COVID, where everybody wants to work from home, there are other people now today. I'm really glad. I used to be a regular in these events until I moved to Riyadh, and COVID came for a couple of years. It was great to see today a lot of good friends and old friends and colleagues that I worked with and people I shared the stage with many times. But these are, today, companies are opening. Jobs are out there now. A lot of people asking, so how you keep your employee from going for an extra 5,000 Riyal or 3,000 Riyal? It's very difficult. And I found that's number 1 and 2 is always the solution, never change.
Great. Thanks, Ishan. Thank you very much. Stasha, finally. Excuse me. We're going to get to you. That's, you're also unique. Yeah, you are the best. And you're also very uniquely positioned on the panel today because you are an independent owner-operator. So what I'd really like to understand is, with the ability that you have, that flexibility, that speed of decision-making, how have you been able to respond to some of the changes over the last few years with regards to work-life balance, remuneration, those sorts of things, without kind of resorting to those more obvious things of trying to put pressure on your wage costs and try and increase your prices so that, you know, there's a bit more flexibility there. Are there some other steps that either you've taken or some other independent operators that you know of have taken in order to be able to respond as quickly and effectively to the challenges?
Well, yeah, it's been
There's
a
a few
journey.
questions in there, sorry.
Yes, a few questions. So I don't know where to start. Where do I begin, right? But us being a small operator, right, a small business and privately funded business, it's a good and bad thing, right?
Sure.
It gives us a lot of flexibility in the decision making, but obviously for whatever we decide and we think it's right, either for business and or staff, or obviously both, we need support. We need support from our community, from our peers, from government, but mostly from the industry to help us educate the entire market for the benefit of the companies, but the market and the industry itself. That's, I think, something, because whenever we are talking, even today, I feel a lot of pressure on businesses itself. We never talk about other stakeholders and their share into entire market, right? And responsibility or liability, name it. So, yeah, this is, I mean, something that is always going on my mind, even when we are talking about the work balance, work-life balance, right? People always talk like what companies can do to improve this for their employees, but I really think that should be a shared responsibility, because from my experience, what I've seen as well, basically working with their schedules, getting them healthy working hours, and leaving them enough space for the rest, for their lives, it's actually not enough, because we have to take the extra step and give them some education how to spend their free time.
Sure.
I'll tell you an example. I was really shocked. We opened recently a kitchen at Time Out Market in Souk al-Bahar in the middle of downtown. Beautiful location. And at the first monthly meeting with my staff, I was shocked to know that none of my staff didn't use their 1 hour break to walk to Dubai Mall, to go to walk to the bridge, to use their free time more productively for themselves, for their well-being. You know, there is a certain steps, there are certain things that companies can do, and many of us are actually doing, but it's a two-way street.
Sure.
And in many of these topics that we are talking about now, it's two-way street, or even more. And it's not just companies, it's not just businesses. There is a shared, and there should be a shared responsibility between all of us.
Sure. Great, thank you. I'm conscious that we're going to run out of time. We're going to skip on to the very last point, if I may, and it's one for all of you. I know you covered it a little bit earlier on, but we talked about automation, AI, the rise of tech, and the inevitability of it. Obviously, the cost effectiveness of using it, but how can we make sure that we haven't just replaced humans with machines, and that we're still, most of us, trying to drive the core of hospitality, which is, you know, ultimately the epitome of that is the human interaction, like you talked about, like some of those things. You can't really replace that, but there is also this sort of juggernaut, so to speak, of technology and artificial intelligence, that it's coming, and it's the inevitability of it. So are there anything that you are seeing in the market that you'd like to try and execute yourselves in response to that, to make sure that we're not overly automating hospitality as an industry?
Well, I think we have to embrace the changes in technology. I mean, I think the food and beverage business has been late, actually, to develop. You know, all other industries have advanced technologically faster than we have. Yeah. And we have to adapt and go with it. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. But is it going to replace human interaction? Never. That's never going to happen. It's always, our business is always going to be about social interactions. And I don't think that jobs are going to be replaced. They're just simply going to be enhanced. And the skill set is going to have to change, and we're going to have to hire more skilled workers to do the new positions that are going to come up from automation. But I don't think it'll definitely not replace the human interaction.
Front of house, of course, it's harder to do. But back of house, there is a risk that...
Back of the house, there is a higher risk than front of house, but also it's only going to replace the redundant jobs that have very low skill set.
Right, okay.
For example, deep frying or flipping burgers or whatnot. But you're never going to replace a chef with a robot. So.
Okay. Hesham?
I think, you know, Dark Kitchen, for example, as a model, they can use
Yeah.
that a lot
Yeah.
because they don't have that human touch. I was offered recently from a vendor the robots to be inside Tim Hortons and go and you know, give coffee to people, and I said no, I'm sorry. People come to the coffee shop because it's a
Right.
it's a human place.
Yeah.
They wanna interact with others. But I think what is the AI? The AI can help us big deal on other stuff in F&B. I just recently I was in Canada, and what Tim Hortons Canada is doing is it's really amazed me on the AI side, where they actually doing a drive-through where when you come to the menu, the entire menu changed to you as a person.
Right. Right.
And it gives you your history in ordering and what are your favorite items. And so that's amazing stuff. And I said, this is really great, because they said, we know John, he likes, when he orders coffee, he likes a donut, chocolate with it.
Right.
So what it shows on the screen, the chocolate donut after you order the coffee. But I think as F&B, you know, the technology has been helping on the QSR side of the business with all the kiosk ordering and all of that. I think that's absolutely fine. But it all depends on what kind of business are you running.
Sure.
For us, AI will help on social media, understanding our consumer profiles. It will help us on our drive-through service, but it will never replace humans in,
Right.
in our restaurants.
Great. Shobhi?
Yeah, I would echo, with the other panelists. So I don't think that it is completely replaceable. And I would also say that we should not fear this, because the human race from the Industrial Revolution till date has always, found better jobs when the technology comes and interrupts the existing manual work. So it has always made the human race to do something better than what they had been doing previously. For us, I think that the technology, what it does is that it acts as an enabler on many fronts. So for example, on our back of the house, it allows us to even start preparing the food before the customer has placed an order. So we do a lot of shoulder surfing, which is a lot of intelligence that is built into the system. It is helping us a lot in terms of driver safety, what routes to take, when to take, where to avoid, so on and so forth. So, so I think technology, if you look at it as an enabler to facilitate the F&B operations, both back of the house and even front of the house, as he rightly mentioned, so when you are able to customize the conversation. Today also people are having a conversation with the customer, but tomorrow if you are able to have more customized conversation, that is what the technology should be able to do. So yeah, that's how we
Great.
create.
Okay. Time for questions, Minnie? No time for questions. It's lunchtime. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.